Hello and welcome to this very special How to Academy event. I'm Matt Stadlen and I was an LBC presenter, I was a BBC presenter, I was a Telegraph columnist. I am now a How to Academy interviewer lots of the time. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be part of How to Academy. And one of the reasons for that is that it means I get to interview legends. And in this case, someone who played a massive part in my childhood, Garry Kasparov, someone who needs absolutely no introduction, but does nonetheless deserve one. He was the world #1 for 2 decades, from the mid-1980s to the mid-noughties. He was also world champion for 15 years. He went on extraordinary, at the time, world record-winning streaks for super tournaments. He was a grand master. And since then, he's got into politics and he's been brave enough to take on Putin and criticize what he has done and is still doing to Russia. Now, Garry identifies, I think, as a Russian, and we might come on to that later. He was born in what is today Azerbaijan, to, like me, a Jewish father and as an Azerbaijani mother.
No, Armenian, sorry.
Armenian, indeed.
Sorry, that's a big mistake. So it's like, it's like mixing Scots and Irish.
That's a huge.
Actually, probably worse.
We could talk in French if you want for the rest of the interview.
No.
Just to make friends. You could probably speak multiple languages. How many languages can you speak?
No, speaking only 2, but I can order food in many languages.
I was distracted by our shared paternal Jewishness because for most of my life, I've not been allowed to be Jewish in the eyes of many because it's only my father who was Jewish. But in fact, I consider myself half Jewish. Do you consider yourself half Jewish?
Yes, I never forgot about my my parents' blood. So I'm half Armenian, half Jewish, though my native tongue was Russian. So I grew up in a Russian-speaking city, and I always felt part of the Russian culture and Russian state. But I also supported both the state of Israel and the Republic of Armenia at a time of need. So I remember about my roots.
So you've written your 3rd non-chess book. This is actually the first of the 3 non-chess books, but it has been brought out again with a new foreword,
yep.
and it has been recontextualized somewhat. And this is called How Life Imitates Chess. And we're going to talk about that and try and learn lessons from it, but we'll also try to get a snapshot of your extraordinary career. And I want to begin by asking you how painful it is for you to identify still so much as Russian, despite being born in Armenia, and yet you are living in America and you have Croatian citizenship. How painful is that for you?
No, that's not painful. It's just, there's certain, realities of life. So yes, I was born and raised, I always say, for my American audience, born and raised in the deep South right next to Georgia. Which is perfectly correct because Azerbaijan was right next to the Republic of Georgia in the deep south of the USSR. So for a moment, the audience is confused. Wow. In the family of engineers, Armenian mother, Jewish father. My father died when I was 7. So a tragic moment of our life. My mother never remarried, spent the remaining 50 years of her life just for me. So that's why for me it's a biggest loss in my life when she died last Christmas from COVID in Moscow, and I just couldn't be with her. I played on the Soviet flag and then on the Russian flag. So probably, if you consider chess a sport, I'm probably the most decorated Soviet athlete or Russian athlete in history, or close to that, just to the very, very top. So with all my titles. Since I left professional chess, I thought it would be, it's like moral duty for me to challenge Putin and to help my country not to slide back into the darkness of KGB dictatorship. Some people say, oh, that was not a game of chess, so I lost. I lost this battle, and I live now in New York City with my family in exile. But I still feel that, I have connection to Russia, to my country. Also, when I say my country, don't be confused. So you mentioned speaking French, or I can have another example. It's like people who were born in Sri Lanka when it was a part of, or in India, or in Algeria when it was part of French Empire. So then, when empire collapses, you move to the metropolis, to the country you belong to. So when people ask me about my move from Baku to Moscow, I said I always lived in a country where Moscow was a capital, and also as half Armenian, I had no actual choice of staying in Baku, because after ethnic cleansing in 1990, so that's the Armenians in Baku, just became extinct. And now I know that my return to Russia would be one-way ticket, and I always buy a round trip. So this is when I had to leave my country in 2013, facing imminent arrest, my mother, she was not happy, because again, I represented her entire life since my father and her husband died in 1971. But she knew that I would be much better off, safer and healthier outside of Russia than being under house arrest or in jail, or even worse, in Putin's Russia. So I expect one day to return, though I don't know when and how. But there are always good news and bad news about dictators. The bad news, we don't know how dictatorship ends. Good news, they also don't know how they end.
You say in this book, and when you were writing the book, so we're talking about
2005, 2006.
15 years ago, and you say that you hope to be able to give the paternal advice to your son, who was then 9 years old, I think, that your own father would have given to you had he survived beyond your 8th year. So as you say, he died when you were 7. What was that like, Gary, growing up without a father, without that paternal advice? And did it have any impact, positive or negative, on your capacities as a chess player, and not just your capacity to win games, but your ability to take that on as a lifestyle choice and one day as a career?
Though my father died when I was 7, he was just 39, was the healthiest man in the family, never went to see a doctor, and died from leukemia, just, like burned down in less than 6 months. But he already played, he didn't know that, nobody knew it, but he already played a decisive role in my life. Because on my Jewish side, my father's side, everybody was a musician. My father was an exception. He was an engineer, but he also graduated a class of music. So there was a Jewish musical family. So my grandmother, my grandfather, my father's younger brother, so they all, belong to the world of music. And naturally, that would be the first choice. So for me to follow their footsteps. And accidentally, so it's this, I learned how to play chess watching my father and my mother, trying to solve some puzzles in the local newspaper in one of the winter evenings, 68 to 69. So I was 5.5, but nobody was there to tweet about it. So that's why I cannot tell you exactly the moment. But it's my recollection, and that this is my mother's. I watched them trying to solve the problem and learn how to move the pieces, and I showed great interest. I didn't know that it was match made in heaven. That is, for me, it was just the turning point of my life. And while I just showed this interest, and I could immediately identify the pieces and pick up the squares, I knew what was black square, what was white square. But my father immediately saw that I was not up to music, so I had to do something else. And the last decision in his life, before he was gone. So he told my mother, so our son had to do chess. Send him to the chess club. That was his last decision, and that's how my destiny. And so he made his choice.
You said that you grew up and were born into a country that was part of Soviet Russia. So even though you were Armenian by birth, you had this identity. And of course, when you started to play chess tournaments as a boy and as a teenager, you would play all around the place, including, for example, in Tbilisi and what is today Georgia. Growing up, did your identity as a Russian, as a Soviet Russian, did that play a role in your desire to be the best? Was part of what made you successful patriotism? Was patriotism an important part?
Look, Soviet Union was somehow a melting pot, though when you talk about, you mentioned Tbilisi, the capital Republic of Georgia, or Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. Those cities were, they had a very strong local national influence. For instance, in Tbilisi, that was a city also of many nationalities, but they all tried to speak Georgian. So that was like the language. Everybody spoke Russian, almost everybody, but still speaking Georgian was important. I grew up in Baku, which was a classical imperial city. That's, speaking Russian was more than enough. Azeris, Armenians, Jews, Russians, there were many nationalities there. Baku was the fourth largest city in the Soviet Union, after Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev. So way over 1 million people, but it was international. So that's why I didn't, feel that's the problems with this identity when I grew up. Of course, at one point I realized that, being half Jewish, half Armenian is a handicap when I faced Anatoly Karpov, the Russian national hero. So there was an element of nationalism played a role. Though still my biggest challenge against Karpov was not, my Jewish Armenian blood, but my rebellion nature. I was not a good party soldier the way Karpov was, and people on top instinctively felt that Garry Kasparov was not the same guy, as Karpov, who could be controlled if he won the title, had won the title. But traveling across the country, and I visited most of the former Soviet republics. So I traveled as a member of Azerbaijan team, and again, being half Armenian, half Jewish. It didn't matter. And also in my family, my mother had two sisters. She was the eldest sister, and there were two other sisters. She married a Jew. The second sister married an Armenian, and the younger sister married an Azeri. So that's why in my family, the cousins, they had mixture of all blood. We all, by the way, all now live in Moscow. Except me. I had to emigrate, but they all live in Moscow. So that tells you that it's the people with this background, the called imperial quote unquote background, who grew up within the Russian culture. So they paid little attention to their blood, but more to the language and culture.
Just briefly on this, you emerged when you became world champion for the first time in the mid-80s. We were still living in the Cold War. The Soviet Union was still intact, and your success came off the back of a tradition, or what had become a tradition, of this rivalry between America and the USSR. So you had the race for space, but you also had the race to have the world chess champion. You think back to the famous world championship of 1972, when Boris Spassky took on Bobby Fischer. These were iconic moments, and this was a mechanism, for particularly perhaps for Soviet Russia, but also for the West, to win the culture wars. And I wonder whether you felt that burden in the early years, and whether you felt actually like, you see what I'm doing here, but whether you felt like a pawn in a bigger game.
The answer is no. I never felt like a pawn in my life. So that's but actually your assessment about the situation in the 70s and 80s was correct. Chess was always viewed and treated by the communist regime in the Soviet Union as a very important ideological weapon to demonstrate, you may call it a tool, yes, not to use the war language, a tool to demonstrate intellectual superiority of communism over decadent West. So that's why from the early days of the Soviet rule, there were heavy investments in chess, looking for talent, building the network of clubs and special sections where young talent could be discovered and then nurtured. So, and eventually made into the his or her way into the elite. I'm probably now just not in the position to criticize the system because I was one of the beneficiaries of it. So if I grew up in another country, God knows whether I would have the same chance to be found out, at early age, and offered good training, advice, and opportunity to talk to the biggest names in the game, like my great teacher Mikhail Botvinnik, the first Soviet champion, called patriarch of Soviet chess. So at age 10, I was invited to his school. So or more likely chess academy. So when Karpov, when you mentioned 1972, when Fischer beat Spassky and ended the Soviet domination. It's a quarter of a century since 1948. Botvinnik won the title, and then until 1972, it was like the domestic affair. So that's this internal affair. So Fischer crushed all the Soviet grandees on the way to the match with Spassky, and then beat him in Reykjavik, fair and square. That was a shock for Soviet authorities. But I can tell you, many people in the Soviet Union, they rooted for Fischer. Psychologically, Fischer was a rebel, someone who could challenge the mighty system, one, warrior, just one in the field against the army, and he beat them. Trust me, more Soviet people actually wanted Fischer to win. But for the Soviet authorities, it was really, just a cold shower, shocking moment. That's why they redoubled their efforts to bring the crown back. And Anatoly Karpov was riding on this wave. So he actually, was a beneficiary. He was a great player, absolutely great player. In 1975, I think he had a fair chance of beating Fischer. So those who thought, it would be one-sided match if Fischer decided to play, no. The reason Fischer was afraid and didn't show up, he recognized that Karpov was already a leader of a new generation. So, and Fischer walked away. Karpov became the champion, and he was viewed as the true Soviet champion. He was Russian, but more like Soviet, good party soldier, and that's why my rise to the top, was quite a bumpy road, because there were many other obstacles before I actually had my chance to beat Karpov in 1985, and for me it was somehow it was political, but it was different because I could feel that I was an agent of change. So and a lot of people, when I became champion, millions of people in my country felt that that could be a harbinger of change in the Soviet Union. If Anatoly Karpov could be beaten.
And you were only 22 when it happened.
I was only 22, and I was different, energetic, aggressive. Imagine, I'm still very, very animated person. Now imagine 36 years ago. So this is and I had many friends in Moscow, just among, it's the Soviet intelligentsia. Some people even cried because they saw it as a chance. So for the whole system to undergo changes. And I was almost immediately engaged in this, in a nascent democratic movement. I didn't understand many things, but I could feel that as the world champion, as someone who was, by Soviet standards, a sacred figure, world champion, it's a living legend. If I did nothing, if I, stayed, away from the changes that were happening in the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, that would be the wrong signal for millions and millions of my compatriots. And to the contrary, if I could be engaged, if I could actually, participate aggressively in promoting these changes, that will send a different signal. And a lot of people could actually overcome their fear, genetic fear. I mean, growing up in the Soviet Union, just made you aware about about dangers of opposing the system or criticizing it. So hopefully, I thought my personal example could actually could be very helpful for them to overcome this fear.
Yeah, and I want to make it crystal clear to those watching this evening or who are watching it back. I just want to make it absolutely crystal clear. how important you were in those years. I mean, if we think of the fame in Britain and beyond, of course, of David Beckham, I mean, you were bigger than that because, as we've seen, you came to symbolize something. It was, you asked earlier whether we can call chess a sport, whether we can call it a sport or not. It was iconic. It was a fundamental position of importance that you held. I want to move the conversation, if we may, and we can come back to your playing career, but I want to move it now to how life imitates chess today. So we've seen that life and politics were inextricably linked with success on the board back when you were playing. Today, you must think that there is a real correlation between success as a chess player and success, whatever we describe it as. And you say in the book that we have to work out what success means for ourselves. But you must think there is a correlation there to have written the book. Tell us in an overview, and then we can dig deeper into it. Tell us what that correlation is at its most basic level.
You want chess and politics?
I want chess and life.
Chess and life.
Your lessons from chess.
Look, it's the I wanted to write a book about my experience as a decision maker, just to find the right words, the right algorithm of transferring my experience from making the thousands of decisions, because each move was a decision, into something practical. Actually, I stumbled with my first publisher. It was an American publishing house, because they said, no, we wanted explicitly the book of tips. I said, no, that's not a cookbook. This is not in a book of tips. This is personal story, and I hope it will be helpful for people reading it. So it led to nowhere. So that's why the original book, once original edition, was in the UK. So it's the though I think the first actually book that was appeared in Germany, it was the UK edition translated in German. So it's 2007. The book spread across Europe, and the way I wrote the book is just I wanted to make sure that people recognize that to improve your decision making formula, the algorithm, you have to understand who you are. That's you have to look deep inside. So the receiving an advice from me or from whoever, the best, because there's so many gurus now telling you must do this and you will improve. Okay, this, but it's like taking the pill that is being promoted, and without even recognizing whether it helps or not, and we can have the similar symptoms, but everything depends on our tests. So you can't actually follow the same formula that helps somebody else to get better, unless it works for you. So I just wanted to explain how it worked for me, and while being aggressive or being defensive, being more conservative, doesn't make you good or bad. It's not inferior, it's not superior. It's just who you are. And going very deep, analyzing your performance, and finding out what are the components of your decision making, what makes you comfortable, what makes you uncomfortable. That's the way to improve. Again, it's a slow motion process. It doesn't happen overnight. There's no one tip or few tips, that's the that you can learn and then just now I go from square one to square four. No, it will be always crawling from square one to 2 and 3 and 4.
So in 1993, you took on Nigel Short. He was the English chess player. He was a very aggressive player. He was, I think you might describe, you probably wouldn't say impetuous, or impulsive, but he really went for it. And aggression is a hallmark of the way you have played chess in your life, and your forthright personality, and you're brave, I think, on the board and off the board. It doesn't get much braver than to take on the regime in Russia as it currently stands. I'm curious to know, in your game against Short, where you came up against someone who was similarly inclined, why you decided to slow things down. You wanted to go at a slower pace.
Oh, it's no offense meant. I was just better player. That's it's the Nigel had great couple of great years. He won the rights to challenge me for the title, but I think it just it was really tough challenge for him because
you did talk tactics, didn't you?
Yeah, it's not about all tactics. I was more advanced as a player, so I could actually vary the style. So that's he's he could launch some of the punches, but it just many of them they went flat. So it is because it's not about just all coming up with a strategy and attacking. You just have to make sure that you can penetrate your enemy's shield. So that's this to go just under the skin. So and Nigel's attacks and Nigel the strength of the game, the power of his punch was not effective enough. It's just like in a boxing, yes, good punches, but he was probably midweight against heavyweight.
But talk to